Your mother is alive, and your fiancé is a demon." Corvus's guttural cry echoed through the sumptuous cathedral, shattering the sacred silence at the exact moment Eduardo was about to say, "I do." His eyes, previously fixed on Sophia's icy beauty, now trembled, fixed on the raven furiously flapping its wings above the altar. The crowd gasped, paralyzed, as Eduardo's heart plummeted into a cold abyss of disbelief. He had to know. He needed to unravel the truth behind those words that seemed to tear at his soul. And what he would discover would forever change the face of his life and that of everyone present. The air in the cathedral grew dense, heavy with disbelief. Eduardo felt a shiver run down his spine, a chilling premonition that had nothing to do with the church's air conditioning. His eyes, previously brimming with a happiness that seemed unshakable, now fixed on Corvus, who hovered above the altar, his dark feathers contrasting with the immaculate white of the bridal decor. The raven didn't stop. With a swooping flight, it approached Eduardo, landing abruptly on the pulpit, and with a sharp beak began to tug at the lace of Sophia's veil, which draped elegantly over the altar, as if wanting to reveal something hidden. Sophia, until then petrified by shock, let out a muffled cry, a mix of surprise and contained anger. "Corvus, stop that right now! What an absurd lack of respect!" Her voice, which moments before was sweet as honey, now carried a harsh, almost unrecognizable tone, revealing a side Eduardo had never seen. She tried to swat the raven away with a brusque, almost violent gesture, but Corvus didn't yield. He lightly pecked her finger, a clear warning, and then turned to Eduardo, emitting a sound that seemed like a deep lament, an insistent caw-caw, while shaking his head in Sophia's direction like a silent accuser. The guests, previously shocked and motionless, began to murmur. Small whispers spread like wildfire, and curious glances divided between the raven, Eduardo, and Sophia, seeking an explanation for the unusual scene. Ms. Helena, a longtime friend of Ms. Lucia, who was sitting in the front row, brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes welling up with an ancient sadness, as if the raven's words had awakened in her a painful, long-held memory and suspicion. She'd always been wary of how quickly Sophia had filled the void left by Ms. Lucia. Eduardo felt his heart clench painfully. Sophia's voice, so altered, and Corvus's persistence, as he had never been aggressive or disrespectful, ignited a burning flame of doubt in his chest. He had known Corvus since he was a child. The raven was more than a pet. It was a family member, a silent confidant of his mother, Ms. Lucia. If Corvus was acting this way, there was a deep reason, something he desperately needed to understand. He looked at Sophia, who was now forcing a smile, trying to hide the nervousness that showed in her eyes, betraying her anguish. Her hands, previously steady, trembled slightly, an undeniable sign of her distress. "Sophia," Eduardo began, his voice low, almost a whisper, but laden with a gravity she had never heard, and which surprised him. "What is Corvus trying to tell us? He would never act like this without a reason." He extended his hand to the raven, who promptly hopped onto his shoulder, nestling there as if seeking protection and complicity, but without stopping its fixed gaze on Sophia, its intelligent black eyes full of a truth begging to be revealed. Sophia swallowed hard, feeling the weight of all eyes on her. "My love, don't listen to a mere animal. He must be scared by the crowd, or perhaps he's sick. There's nothing for him to tell us, except that he's ruining our special day." She tried to laugh, but the sound came out forced, almost hysterical, and was lost in the tense silence. Her eyes swept the audience, seeking support, but found only confused and suspicious faces. The mask of perfection she wore was beginning to crack, and Eduardo, for the first time in a long time, noticed the deep fissures. The image of the beloved woman, whom he believed to be the personification of goodness and loyalty, began to distort in his mind, revealing dark contours. The web of lies Corvus had mentioned now seemed more real than ever, threatening to swallow everything he had built. He needed answers, and he would seek them no matter the cost. Corvus's unwavering loyalty, his unconditional love for his mother, and Sophia's strange and revealing reaction all mingled in a whirlwind of emotions that demanded immediate clarity. Eduardo, with Corvus still nestled on his shoulder, felt a knot in his throat. Sophia's forced voice, her attempt to deflect the subject, all seemed to confirm the suspicions Corvus had planted. He watched her, the woman who was about to become his wife, and saw, for the first time, not the image of perfection she had always projected, but a shadow of fear in her eyes, an almost imperceptible tension in her jaw. "Sophia, please, look at me," he asked, his voice now firmer, an echo of his natural authority. "Corvus is part of my family. He would never act like this without a reason. What do you know about my mother? What does he want me to know?" Sophia took a step back, her hands clasped tightly under the bouquet. A pale blush crept up her neck, and she averted her gaze, avoiding Eduardo's eyes and those of the crowd. "Eduardo, my love, this is ridiculous. We've already talked about your mother. She's gone. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. Corvus is just disturbed. Perhaps her absence has affected him. There's no secret. There's nothing for him to accuse me of." Her voice was a mix of pleading and irritation, and as she tried to force a smile, her lips trembled, revealing the fragility of her facade. Miss Helena, in the front row, coughed discreetly, drawing the guests' attention. Her eyes, previously tearful, now shone with silent determination. She leaned over to the lady beside her, whispering something that made the other woman's eyes widen. The tension in the cathedral was almost palpable, and the murmurs turned into more audible whispers, full of speculation. Corvus, on Eduardo's shoulder, let out a sharp caw, as if mocking Sophia's attempt to defend herself. He stretched his neck and gently pecked Eduardo's ear, then pointed his beak at Sophia's hand, which still clutched the bouquet tightly, and then at the engagement ring on her finger, as if there was a connection between them, a link Eduardo should unravel. Eduardo felt a chill. Corvus's gesture was so specific, so intentional. He looked at the diamond ring he himself had given Sophia, a symbol of his love and trust. Now, it felt like a weight on her finger, a reminder of the fortune Sophia seemed to covet so much. The image of his mother, Miss Lucia, a gentle and loving woman who always prioritized family, flashed in his mind. The pain of her supposed loss, which Sophia had so skillfully consoled, now mingled with a bitter suspicion. "Sophia, stop this," Eduardo said, his voice cold as ice, cutting off her attempt to justify herself. "If you have something to hide, you'd better tell me now. Corvus would never lie, and I feel you are lying." He took a step forward, closing the distance between them, and the intensity of his gaze made her recoil. The blind love he felt was dissipating, giving way to painful clarity. He needed the truth for himself and to honor his mother's memory. He would not allow the ceremony to continue until every shadow of doubt was dispelled. His connection to his mother, Corvus's loyalty, and his family's integrity were at stake. He would not hesitate to expose the charade, no matter the cost. Eduardo, his heart pounding, felt Sophia's coldness. The woman he loved was crumbling under the weight of a truth he could barely conceive. Corvus, on his shoulder, let out a low caw, a lament, sharing the pain. The church, once a stage for celebration, was now a silent courtroom, where every gaze from the stunned audience fixed on Sophia, awaiting confession. "Sophia, please, don't make me doubt everything we've lived," Eduardo pleaded, his voice choked. He extended his hand, reaching for hers, but Sophia abruptly pulled it back. Her eyes, once expressive, now seemed like closed windows, hiding an inner storm. She shook her head, denying, but the denial was weak. My mother. Do you swear you know nothing about her whereabouts, that she isn't alive? Sophia, with trembling lips, tried to speak, but the words seemed caught in her throat. Her makeup began to smudge under her eyes, betraying her effort to hold back tears. Eduardo, I already told you she's gone. Why are you insisting on this now, on our wedding day? This raven is crazy, ruining everything. She pointed at Corvus, but the raven stared back with piercing eyes. Ms. Helena, unable to bear the charade, rose from the front row. Her dignified posture, her eyes conveyed urgency. Eduardo, my dear, she began, her voice soft but firm. I always admired Miss Lucia, a woman of substance. She would never abandon her son. I found her disappearance strange, and Sophia's haste to marry. Something didn't add up. Miss Helena's words, his mother's friend, struck Eduardo like lightning. Sophia turned to Miss Helena, her eyes flashing. How dare you? What kind of friend are you to sow discord on a day like this? Her voice rose a pitch, losing all trace of sweetness. The mask had fallen, revealing a cold and calculating woman. Eduardo, shocked by Sophia's aggression, felt a chill. The image of the gentle and understanding woman shattered. Sophia, enough! Ms. Helena expresses what many here are thinking, and what Corvus tells me with every gesture is that there's a terrible truth. He looked at the raven, who, in response, flew from his shoulder to the altar, and with its beak pulled a satin ribbon tied to a flower arrangement. The ribbon was the blue of Miss Lucia's scarf. A shiver ran down Eduardo's spine. That blue scarf. It was his mother's trademark. Corvus, with surprising intelligence, not only spoke but showed. It held the blue ribbon in its beak and brought it to Eduardo, depositing it in his hand. Then it flew to Eduardo's shoulder, and with its beak pointed towards the sacristy, then to the cathedral's side door, a discreet exit. Tears streamed down Eduardo's face, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming mix of anger, betrayal, and faint hope. Sophia, realizing how exposed she was, tried one last gambit. Eduardo, please don't listen to that animal. He's manipulating you. I love you. Don't let him destroy our future. She extended her hand, but Eduardo recoiled, his mother's blue ribbon clutched in his palm. You don't love me, Sophia, Eduardo said, his voice firm. You love my fortune, and you did something terrible to my mother. I will find out the truth, now. He turned, following the direction Corvus had indicated, the blue ribbon in his hand. The audience watched in stunned silence as the groom, guided by a raven, walked away from the altar, leaving behind an unmasked bride and a future in ruins. Justice, he knew, would begin at that moment. Eduardo, with his mother's blue ribbon clutched in his palm, felt the ground beneath his feet waver. Each step away from the altar was a step towards an unknown truth, one he now yearned for with all his soul. Corvus, on his shoulder, cawed softly, like a silent encourager, and pointed with his beak towards the sacristy's side door, a discreet exit leading to the back of the cathedral. The crowd, previously paralyzed, began to stir, some curious, others shocked, but all with their eyes fixed on Eduardo and the abandoned bride. Sophia, her face disfigured by rage and panic, screamed, "Eduardo, stop! Don't leave me! I can explain. It's all a misunderstanding." Her voice, once melodious, was now shrill, tearing through the silence broken only by murmurs. She tried to run after him, but the long veil and heavy dress hindered her, and she stumbled, almost falling. The image of the perfect bride completely shattered, revealing the fragility of her lie. Miss Helena, with an expression of deep sadness and indignation, approached Sophia, but not to console. "Your cruelty knows no bounds, Sophia. Miss Lucia was always good to you. How could you do this?" Miss Helena's voice, though low, carried the weight of an accusation that echoed through the church walls, reinforcing Eduardo's conviction. Eduardo didn't look back. His mind was on his mother, Miss Lucia. The pain of her supposed loss, which had consumed him for months, now transformed into a cold fury. He imagined his mother, gentle and loving somewhere, perhaps suffering, while he, blind with love, prepared to marry her tormentor. Guilt washed over him, but was quickly replaced by the urgency to act. Corvus, like a faithful guide, flew ahead of Eduardo, indicating the way through a narrow, dimly lit corridor that led to the cathedral's annexes. The scent of incense and flowers gave way to an aroma of mold and dust, and the sound of the church's murmurs faded, replaced by the echo of Eduardo's own footsteps. His heart pounded erratically, a mix of hope and dread. What would he find? At the end of the corridor, Corvus landed on an old wooden door, scratched and with peeling paint. The raven pecked insistently at the rusty doorknob, then looked at Eduardo as if saying, "It's here." Eduardo hesitated for an instant, his hand trembling as he touched the cold doorknob. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. Holding his breath, he slowly opened the door. The room was small, dark and damp, with only a barred window high up, through which a sliver of light entered. In the corner, huddled in an old chair, was a fragile figure with disheveled white hair and simple, crumpled clothes. It was Miss Lucia. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, were dull and frightened. She was thin, pale, but alive. Eduardo felt a scream caught in his throat. "Mother!" He ran to her, kneeling, holding her cold, thin hands. The tears he had held back for so long flowed freely. Miss Lucia, hearing his voice, slowly raised her head, her eyes widening with disbelief, and then with a glimmer of recognition. A faint but genuine smile appeared on her lips. "My son, you came." Her voice was a whisper, almost inaudible, but full of deep emotion. She extended a trembling hand and touched Eduardo's face, as if to make sure he was real. Corvus, from Eduardo's shoulder, cawed softly, as if celebrating the reunion, and then flew to Miss Lucia's shoulder, nestling there like a faithful guardian. Eduardo hugged her with all his strength, feeling his mother's fragile body in his arms. That embrace was confirmation that true love and family loyalty were the pillars of his existence. The pain of Sophia's betrayal was still there, but the joy of finding his mother alive and his gratitude to Corvus were immeasurable. He helped her up, feeling her weakness, and guided her out of that makeshift cell. Justice would come, he knew. But now, the most important thing was to care for his mother and rebuild the life Sophia had tried to destroy. Human connection, unconditional love, overcoming a cruel obstacle, all manifested in that emotional reunion. He promised himself that Sophia would pay for every day of suffering she had inflicted on his beloved mother. Eduardo, with Miss Lucia leaning on his arm, emerged from the sacristy, the blue ribbon still crumpled in his other hand. The cathedral's light, which had previously seemed cold and impersonal, now radiated a warmth of hope. Miss Lucia, faltering, pressed against her son, her eyes brimming with tears of relief and disbelief. Corvus, on her shoulder, cawed softly, like a whisper of encouragement. Upon seeing them, the crowd in the church nave let out a collective murmur, a mix of shock and astonishment. Sophia, who was still near the altar, pale and with her face streaked with mascara, recoiled a step, as if she had seen a ghost. Her eyes, previously full of rage, now expressed a chilling terror. Miss Helena, who had approached the side aisle, ran to them, arms open. "Lucia! My God! You're alive! I knew it! I knew it!" She hugged Miss Lucia tenderly, and the two women, long-time friends, cried together, a cry that carried the pain of separation and the joy of reunion. Eduardo watched the scene, feeling a knot in his throat. His mother's presence, so real and so fragile, was living proof of Sophia's cruelty. The guests, who had previously whispered, now spoke openly, their voices laden with indignation. "It's unbelievable. How could she do that? Poor Miss Lucia." Sophia, isolated and unmasked, felt the weight of every gaze, every word. She tried to lift her head with dignity, but her slumped shoulders and the expression of defeat on her face revealed the extent of her downfall. Eduardo, with his mother safe in Ms. Helena's arms, turned to Sophia. His eyes, once blind with love, now stared at her with cutting clarity, devoid of affection, only deep disappointment and unwavering determination. "Sophia," he said, his voice echoing through the cathedral, "you not only tried to steal my fortune, but you stole my peace, my trust, and cruelest of all, my mother's freedom. You will pay for this." Sophia opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. The truth, exposed so publicly and undeniably, had silenced her. Her dream of social ascent, built on lies and the suffering of others, crumbled before her eyes, transforming into a nightmare of shame and repudiation. Miss Lucia, still weak, looked at her son, then at Corvus, who was caressing her with his beak. "My son, Corvus. He saved me," she whispered, her voice choked. "He never abandoned me, even when I thought no one would come." The gratitude in her eyes was a balm for Eduardo's soul, who felt his heart warm with his mother's unconditional love and the loyalty of his faithful companion. Eduardo took Miss Lucia's hand, which was still trembling, and kissed it gently. "You are safe now, Mother. I promise. No one will ever harm you again." He helped her sit on one of the front pews, while Miss Helena tenderly supported her, offering her a handkerchief. Eduardo's focus, at that moment, was his mother's recovery. Justice for Sophia would be a necessary step, but the priority was to heal Miss Lucia's wounds. The cathedral, which should have been the stage for a new beginning, became the setting for a reckoning. But amidst the pain of betrayal, a new strength was born in Eduardo, a clarity about what truly mattered. The richness of his life was not in possessions, but in his mother's presence, Corvus's loyalty, and his family's integrity. He looked at Sophia one last time, who was now being discreetly escorted by some security guards, her eyes empty. The void she left in his heart was quickly filled by the fullness of rediscovered love. Overcoming began there, with the promise of a future where truth and love would prevail. Eduardo, with Miss Lucia safe in Miss Helena's arms, felt immense relief, but the fury over Sophia's betrayal still burned. He watched her being escorted away, her eyes empty, and the sense of fullness from rediscovered love was a balm for the void left behind. His mother was the priority. He helped her sit on a pew while Miss Helena supported her. Corvus, faithful, landed on Miss Lucia's shoulder, gently pecking her, a gesture of affection and protection. The cathedral, once a stage for celebration, was now a scene of silence and shock. The murmurs ceased as Eduardo knelt before his mother, holding her hands. "Mother, you are safe, I promise. No one will ever harm you again." Miss Lucia, still weak, squeezed her son's hand, a faint smile on her lips. "My son, my Eduardo, Corvus, you saved me." Her words were a whisper, but laden with a profound gratitude that touched the souls of all present who watched the scene moved. As Eduardo tried to calm his mother, his eyes turned to Sophia, who was being led out. She paused for an instant, turned, and with a defiant look that contrasted with her previous shame, screamed, her voice echoing through the nave. "You think you know me, Eduardo? You know nothing. Do you think it was just about the money? You have no idea what your mother did to me in the past. This is just the beginning." Sophia's declaration hit Eduardo like lightning. It wasn't just about the fortune. What could his mother have done? The crowd was shocked, and Miss Lucia, hearing the words, trembled, her eyes widening in terror, as if a painful, long-buried memory had been unearthed. Corvus, on her shoulder, cawed loudly, a sound of warning and disapproval. Eduardo felt a chill run down his spine. Sophia's revelation, so unexpected and full of venom, opened a new wound in his heart. He had always seen his mother as the personification of goodness. What was Sophia insinuating? Was it another lie to destabilize him? Or was there a dark truth he had never known? The complexity of the situation deepened, transforming simple betrayal into a tangle of family secrets. Ms. Helena, noticing Ms. Lucia's anguish, hugged her more tightly. "Don't listen to her, Lucia. It's all lies. She just wants to cause more pain." But Ms. Lucia's expression, a mix of fear and guilt, said otherwise. She avoided Eduardo's gaze, a gesture he would never expect from his mother. Sophia, before finally being led away, cast one last look at Eduardo, a cruel smile on her lips. "The truth always comes out, Eduardo, and you will regret underestimating me." Then she was dragged out, leaving behind a trail of doubts and a new layer of pain. Eduardo felt the weight of Sophia's words. The victory of having rescued his mother now seemed incomplete, stained by this new uncertainty. He looked at Miss Lucia, who was now crying silently, her face hidden in Miss Helena's shoulder. What did Sophia mean? Was there something in her past, or in his mother's past, that he didn't know? Justice for Sophia was just the beginning, but the real battle would be to unravel this new web of secrets, and to understand the depth of the pain his mother carried. His family's love and loyalty were being tested in a way he never imagined. He needed answers, and he knew that to heal his mother and himself, he would have to confront every shadow of the past. Eduardo, his heart heavy, watched his mother, who was crying on Miss Helena's shoulder. Sophia's poisonous words echoed, "What did your mother do to me in the past?" The question corroded Miss Lucia's image of goodness. Kneeling, he whispered, "Mother, what did Sophia mean? You need to tell me." Miss Lucia avoided him, trembling with fear. Corvus, on her shoulder, pecked her cheek. Miss Helena intervened. "Eduardo, your mother is weak. She needs to rest. It's not the time for questions." She indicated discretion. The truth required delicacy. Eduardo understood. Miss Lucia's health was the priority. He stood up, kissing his mother's forehead. "It's okay, Mother. You don't have to talk now. You are safe. I am here. Always." The promise calmed his mother, who raised her eyes. He helped Ms. Helena lead Ms. Lucia through a discreet exit from the cathedral. A car was waiting. Corvus flew ahead. On the way, Eduardo felt the weight of the new uncertainty. His mother seemed to be hiding a past that could redefine everything. Sophia's image, with that cruel smile, persisted. She was a manipulator of secrets. At the mansion, a refuge, Miss Lucia was taken to a comfortable room. A trusted doctor was called. While the doctor attended to her, Eduardo waited anxiously in the living room, his mother's blue ribbon in his hand. Corvus landed on the window. Miss Helena sat beside Eduardo. "Eduardo, don't let Sophia's words shake you. She is cruel. Miss Lucia has always been upright. But we all have our burdens, our secrets." She sighed. "The past, sometimes, has strange ways of catching up to us." Those words intensified Eduardo's curiosity. He knew Miss Helena, his mother's friend, had some clue. "Miss Helena, please, if you know something, I need you to tell me. My mother is suffering, and I can't bear to see her like this. I need to understand." His eyes pleaded for answers. Miss Helena hesitated. "There's a story, Eduardo, an old one that your mother always wanted to keep secret. Perhaps it's time for you to know, to understand Sophia, And to understand your mother, she paused. Your mother had a great love before your father, a forbidden love which brought unexpected consequences. Eduardo felt a shock. His mother, a forbidden love. That revelation opened a rift in the image he had of Miss Lucia. The web of secrets grew denser. Eduardo was ready. For his mother, for his family, he would unravel every mystery. Ms. Helena squeezed Eduardo's hand, her eyes serious, filled with deep compassion. Your mother, Eduardo, before your father, was an innocent young woman, full of life and dreams. She fell madly in love with a penniless artist, a free spirit, but a love forbidden by Lucia's traditional family. They, concerned with status and appearances, would never allow such a union, and Lucia, young and naive, found herself in a terrible dilemma. Eduardo listened, stunned, feeling the weight of his mother's story fall upon him. Her image, always so demure and dignified, transformed before his eyes, revealing a vulnerability he had never known existed. A forbidden love and unexpected consequences, he whispered, his voice choked with rising emotion. Miss Helena sighed deeply, looking at the window where Corvus watched the garden with unusual quietness, as if also absorbing every word of the story. Yes, from that intense and forbidden love, a child was born. A secret your mother guarded with her life for fear of dishonor and social rejection. In those days, Eduardo, society was relentlessly cruel to single mothers. Lucia was forced to make a painful decision, one that haunted her throughout her life, leaving an indelible mark on her soul. Eduardo's heart gave a painful leap in his chest. A child. His mother had another child? The revelation was an earthquake in his soul, shaking all his certainties. Shock, sadness, and a deep compassion for the young Lucia flooded him. "Where is this child? Who is it?" he asked, the urgency in his voice undeniable. Miss Helena slowly shook her head, the sadness on her face evident, almost palpable. The child was given up for adoption, in absolute secrecy. Lucia never saw her again, never heard from her. She married your father shortly after, and he, a good and honorable man, never knew about this painful past. She carried this pain alone all the time, fearing that the truth would come out and destroy everything she had built with so much effort and sacrifice. Eduardo felt a knot in his throat, tightening with each new piece of information. His mother's guilt, the fear in her eyes at the cathedral, everything began to make terrible sense. Sophia wasn't just lying for the fortune. She found this old wound and used it to manipulate and torture Lucia in a cruel and inhumane way. So, Sophia, she discovered this? "I believe so, my dear," Miss Helena confirmed, her voice low but firm. Sophia was always astute, with a keen mind for discovering weaknesses. She must have scoured your mother's past with a magnifying glass, found this story, and used it as blackmail, an instrument of power. It's the only explanation for her cruelty, which goes far beyond simple greed. Eduardo squeezed his mother's blue ribbon in his hand, feeling the soft, familiar fabric. Lucia's image, once monolithic in her goodness and strength, was now more complex, human, and vulnerable. The pain he felt for her was immense, a weight in his chest he could barely bear. He stood up, walking to the window, where Corvus awaited him. The raven cawed softly, as if sharing the weight of the revelation, a silent companion in his anguish. "My mother, she suffered so much for so long," Eduardo murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "And I, blinded by my own love and Sophia's lies, noticed nothing. I let Sophia hurt her again, reopening a wound that never healed. Guilt washed over him, but also a new and powerful determination. He needed to protect his mother, not only from present evil, but also from the ghosts of the past, which were now resurfacing. Miss Helena approached, placing her hand on his shoulder with affection and understanding. Don't blame yourself, Eduardo. Lucia is a strong woman, but this secret was too heavy for her to carry alone for so many years. Now that the truth has begun to surface, she can finally free herself from this burden. And you, my dear, with your love and support, are the key to her healing. Eduardo looked at the room where his mother rested, feeling a wave of protective love. Justice against Sofia was important and necessary, but the true mission now was to heal his mother's wounds, help her face the past, and perhaps find the peace that had been denied her for so many years. Sofia's web of lies was deeper and more perverse than he imagined, but the truth, however painful, was the only path to true freedom and family reconstruction. He felt a renewed love for Miss Lucia, a love that embraced all her imperfections, her sufferings, and her history. Human connection, he knew now, was, in fact, the greatest wealth one could possess. Eduardo remained by the window, his mother's blue ribbon still in his hands, feeling the weight of Miss Helena's words. Wealth, for him, had always been a means to provide comfort and security, but now, true opulence resided in the invisible web of affection and loyalty that bound him to his family. He turned to Miss Helena, his eyes tearful, but with a new light of understanding, a clarity that dispelled the last mists of emotional blindness. I need to talk to her, Miss Helena, not to pressure her, but so she knows I am here, that I love her unconditionally, and that no secret can diminish my love for her, nor a shred of her dignity in my eyes. Miss Helena nodded, a gentle smile on her lips, her eyes shining with the wisdom of one who had witnessed many pains and many healings. Go, my dear, she needs you. But be gentle, Eduardo. The wound is old and deep, and her healing time will be her own time. With a heavy heart, but determined to offer a safe haven, Eduardo entered the room. Miss Lucia lay pale, her hair spread on the pillow, but her eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, as if trying to decipher invisible patterns in her memories. Corvus, on the windowsill, watched her with protective quietness, a winged guardian. Upon seeing her son, a slight tremor ran through his mother's fragile body, and she averted her gaze, shame still visible on her face, a shadow that had accompanied her for decades. Eduardo sat on the edge of the bed, taking Miss Lucia's cold, wrinkled hand. "Mother," he began, his voice soft, full of tenderness that came from the depths of his soul. "Miss Helena told me a little about your past, about the love you experienced, about the child." He paused, squeezing her hand gently, conveying all the support he felt. "I don't want you to feel ashamed, Mother. I just want you to know that my love for you is greater than any secret, any mistake you may have made. You are my mother, and I love you above all else, with all your stories and your scars." Miss Lucia slowly turned her face to him. Her eyes, previously filled with fear and guilt, now brimmed with overflowing tears. A solitary tear ran down her temple, wetting the pillow, a river of contained emotions. "My son, I was so afraid you would hate me, that you would abandon me as I was abandoned by that past." Her voice was an almost inaudible whisper laden with years of repressed pain and guilt, now finally released. Eduardo brought her hand to his lips, kissing it with devotion, a gesture of unconditional love. "Never, Mother, never. The only thing I feel is pain that you carried this burden alone for so long, and anger at Sofia for having used your pain against you in such a cruel way." He gently stroked her white hair, feeling his mother's fragility. "I am here now, and we will overcome this together. You are no longer alone, my dear mother." Corvus, as if understanding the depth of that moment of connection, flew from the windowsill and landed gently on the bed, near Miss Lucia's hand. He delicately pecked the sheet, then looked at her, his black eyes conveying an unwavering calm, a silent reminder of his loyalty. Miss Lucia, with a faint smile, extended a trembling hand and caressed the raven's head. "My faithful friend," she murmured, her voice a little firmer, a thread of hope. That simple gesture, the interaction with Corvus, brought a glimmer of peace to Miss Lucia's eyes. Eduardo realized that the raven's presence was a constant link to truth and unconditional love. That room, once a stage for a silence laden with secrets, was now filled with an atmosphere of acceptance and affection, a balm for wounded souls. "Mother, I want to understand everything in your own time," Eduardo continued, his voice firm but gentle, promising patience and understanding. "Not to judge you, but so we can heal these wounds together, and so Sophia can no longer use this against you or against us ever again." He knew the journey would be long and full of challenges, but the determination in his eyes was unwavering. Miss Lucia squeezed Eduardo's hand, a sign of trust he had longed for with all his being. I will try, my son. For you. For us." Her words were a first step, small but significant, towards liberation from a painful past. Eduardo felt immense relief, a comforting warmth in his chest. Overcoming began there, in that room, with the promise of unconditional love and support. Human connection, he knew, was the most powerful force that existed, capable of healing the deepest wounds and rebuilding the most broken bonds. True wealth lay in forgiveness, understanding, and the love that blossomed even in the shadows of the past. Miss Lucia, her voice still weak, but with a new glimmer of hope in her eyes, squeezed Eduardo's hand. I will try, my son. For you. For us." Those words, laden with a long-held vulnerability, were a balm to Eduardo's heart. He knew that the journey to unravel the past and heal the wounds would be long, but his mother's willingness was the first and most important step. Corvus, on the windowsill, let out a soft caw, like a silent encouragement. Eduardo remained by Miss Lucia's side, holding her hand, feeling the texture of her aged skin and the marks of a life filled with sacrifices and secrets. "There's no rush, Mother. Just know that I am here to listen, to support, for whatever is needed." The tenderness in his voice was an invitation for Miss Lucia to feel safe to open her heart. Ms. Helena, sensing the intimacy of the moment, discreetly withdrew, closing the door with a soft creak, leaving mother and son alone with the faithful raven. Silence filled the room, not a heavy silence, but one of expectation and understanding. Ms. Lucia took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if reliving every scene from her past. "I was so young, Eduardo," she began, her voice trembling but gaining strength with each word. "Naive, full of dreams that life in the big city promised me. It was at one of those artist gatherings in a bohemian studio that I met him, a painter with eyes that seemed to see the soul and hands that transformed canvas into poetry." Eduardo listened attentively, the image of his mother, always so reserved and practical, transforming into a passionate and dreamy young woman. The story of a forbidden love, now told by the protagonist herself, gained colors and nuances that Ms. Helena could not have conveyed. "He was different from anything I knew," Ms. Lucia continued, a melancholic smile appearing on her lips. "Our family, as you know, always valued tradition, stability. An artist without possessions was unthinkable for them. But love doesn't choose reasons, my son. It simply happens." A tear ran down Ms. Lucia's face, and Eduardo wiped it with his thumb, a gesture of affection that spoke more than 1,000 words. "We met in secret, in parks, in hidden cafes. Every moment was stolen, precious. I knew I was defying all expectations, but I couldn't stop. That love was my rebellion, my freedom." The emotion was palpable in the air, and Corvus, on the windowsill, seemed to listen with the same intensity, his black eyes fixed on Miss Lucia. And then life presented us with an unexpected consequence, Miss Lucia continued, her voice choked. I discovered I was expecting a child. The shock, the fear, the dishonor it would bring to the family was something I couldn't face. My beloved artist, he wanted to take responsibility, to fight for us, but I was paralyzed by the dread of social judgment, of rejection. In those days, Eduardo, being a single mother, was a terrible stigma. She paused, breathing with difficulty, the pain of the memory still vivid. Eduardo squeezed his mother's hand, feeling the depth of that suffering. Don't worry, Mother. You don't have to carry this weight alone, ever again. Miss Lucia looked at her son, her eyes tearful, but with a glimpse of relief. It was a decision that haunts me to this day. I gave the child up for adoption, in absolute secrecy. I never heard from them again. I married your father later, and he, a good man, never knew about this pain. I lived with the guilt, with the fear that the truth would come out. And Sophia found out. She used it against me, Eduardo, in a way you cannot imagine. Miss Lucia's voice broke, and she gave herself over to crying, a cry of years of pain and regret, finally released in her son's arms. Eduardo hugged her tightly, promising in his heart that he would do everything to heal his beloved mother's wounds. Eduardo hugged his mother with all the strength he had, feeling the tremors that ran through Miss Lucia's fragile body. His mother's tears wet his shoulder, a river of pain suppressed for so many years. He stroked her white hair, whispering words of comfort and unconditional love. I'm here, Mother, I always will be. You don't have to carry this weight alone ever again. Miss Lucia, her voice choked with tears, tried to compose herself, raising her face to look at her son, her eyes red and swollen, but with a glimmer of gratitude. Corvus from the windowsill let out a low caw, like a silent lament that echoed the sadness in the room. Sophia. She found out everything, Eduardo. Miss Lucia began, her voice still weak but with a palpable urgency. I don't know how, but she found the records, the few clues that existed about that past. She confronted me, not with anger, but with a calculating coldness that chilled my soul. She said that if I didn't do exactly what she commanded, she would reveal to everyone, to you, to society, that I had an illegitimate child, that I had abandoned a child. She threatened to destroy your reputation, your mother's memory, our family's honor. Eduardo felt a knot tighten in his throat. Sophia's cruelty was even deeper than he imagined. It wasn't just greed, but a malice that delighted in exploiting the oldest and most painful wounds. He squeezed his mother's hand, encouraging her to continue. She forced me to sign documents, to transfer assets, to distance myself from everything. She wanted me to disappear, for the world to believe I had died, or that I had fled, and to ensure I wouldn't speak, she kept me. She kept me in an isolated place, under constant surveillance. She said it was for my own good, to protect the secret, but it was a prison, Eduardo. A prison where every day I feared the truth would come out in an even more devastating way. Ms. Lucia's words revealed the extent of the torment she had endured. Sophia's image, once a radiant bride, was now that of a merciless tormentor who used a woman's vulnerability to weave her web of lies and domination. Eduardo felt a wave of anger, but also an overwhelming compassion for his mother's silent suffering. She made me believe you were fine, that you didn't miss me. She said I was a burden, that my absence was a relief for everyone. But Corvus, my Corvus, he always tried to warn me, to give me hope. He brought small objects, feathers, leaves, as if wanting to tell me that the world outside still existed, that you still cared. Miss Lucia looked at the raven, who now landed on the edge of the bed near her hand. She extended a trembling finger and caressed the bird's head, a gesture of profound gratitude. "Corvus is an angel, Mother," Eduardo murmured, his eyes tearful. "He was the one who guided me, who didn't let me give up on you. He knew. He always knew." The raven's loyalty was a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. Miss Lucia took a deep breath, seeming to finally relieve a long-held burden. "I felt so ashamed, Eduardo, so guilty about that past, about having made that decision, and Sophia used that shame against me like a weapon. I feared that if the truth came out, you would hate me, that the image you had of me, of your mother, would be destroyed." Eduardo hugged his mother in a new embrace, stronger, more protective. "Never, Mother, never. My love for you is unwavering. And what Sophia did, she will pay for, not just for the crimes against the fortune, but for the cruelty she inflicted on your soul." Eduardo's voice was firm, laden with a determination that left no room for doubt. Justice now had a new, deeper, and more personal meaning. He would not only rescue his mother from physical captivity, but also from the shackles of guilt and shame that Sophia had so cruelly exploited. The truth, however painful, was the path to true liberation. Eduardo hugged his mother tenderly, feeling the tremors in her fragile body subside. Miss Lucia, exhausted but visibly lighter, rested her head on her son's shoulder, the pain suppressed for years finally finding relief. Corvus, always vigilant, remained on the windowsill, a silent testament to loyalty. "Don't worry about the shame anymore, Mother," Eduardo whispered, his voice firm. "Nothing you have done diminishes my love or your dignity. What matters is that we are together now, and we will face all of this." Miss Lucia raised her face, her tearful eyes meeting Eduardo's. A faint smile appeared on her lips, the first sign of peace. "My son, I don't know how to thank you. You saved me." "We saved each other, Mother, with the help of Corvus, who never gave up." Eduardo looked at the raven, who cawed softly, as if confirming his words. The connection between the three was palpable, a bond of love and gratitude. In the following days, the mansion, once a stage for intrigues, became a refuge for healing. Miss Lucia, with the support of Eduardo and Miss Helena, unraveled her past. She spoke of the forbidden love, the social fear, and the pain of separation from her first child. Each word was a step towards liberation, and Eduardo listened with patience, reaffirming his love and acceptance. Sophia's matter was handled with determination. Eduardo, with his lawyers, ensured the annulment of documents signed under coercion. The evidence of blackmail and illegal imprisonment of Miss Lucia was irrefutable. Sophia, publicly unmasked, did not escape the consequences. High society, which she so coveted, turned its back on her. Her name, once glamorous, was now synonymous with fraud and cruelty. She lost everything: status, fortune, and freedom, facing a legal process that would remove her from the world she tried to steal. Eduardo felt no pleasure in her downfall, only the satisfaction that justice had been served. The most important thing for Eduardo was his mother's recovery. Miss Lucia, little by little, regained the sparkle in her eyes and her joy. She spent hours in the garden with Corvus, sharing stories. Finally, free from an invisible burden, the wound of the past, still present, was no longer an open sore, but a scar of overcoming and resilience. One afternoon in the garden, Miss Lucia looked at Eduardo with serenity. "I think a lot about my first child, Eduardo. I would like to know if they are well, if they had a happy life." Eduardo took his mother's hand, feeling her renewed strength. "We can try to find out, Mother. No rush, no expectations, just for your peace. If they want to meet us, we'll be here. If not, we'll know they're well, somewhere." Miss Lucia nodded, a tear of hope running down her face. Yes, that would be a gift. Eduardo smiled, his heart overflowing with love. He had learned that true wealth was not in mansions or fortunes, but in the unbreakable bonds of family, in the ability to forgive, to love unconditionally, and to heal together. That garden, with his mother by his side and Corvus flying freely above them, was his true treasure. Human connection, he knew, was the greatest legacy, the most precious inheritance. The search for her first child became a new chapter in Miss Lucia's life, a delicate journey that Eduardo embraced with the same dedication with which he had rescued his mother from Sophia's clutches. It was not a frantic search, but a path trodden with patience and respect, guided by the hope of bringing even more peace to his mother's heart. Eduardo mobilized his resources, but with a sensitivity that went beyond business efficiency. He wanted the search to be a healing process, not a reawakening of old pains. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion, once a stage for secrets and anxieties, now breathed an air of serenity and purpose. Miss Lucia spent her mornings in the garden talking with Corvus, who seemed to understand every word, every sigh. She told the Raven about the young artist, about the secret meetings, about the fear that led her to such a painful decision. Corvus, in response, gently pecked her hand, like a silent confidant, a constant reminder that love and loyalty can overcome even the deepest scars. Eduardo, alongside Miss Helena, observed his mother's transformation. The sparkle in Miss Lucia's eyes returned, not the sparkle of youth, but one of wisdom and acceptance. She had forgiven herself, and this was visible in every gesture, in every smile. The wound of the past, though never erased, had become a scar that told a story of resilience, not shame. Regarding Sophia, news was scarce and distant, but sufficient to confirm that justice, at its own pace, was being served. She faced the consequences of her actions, stripped of everything she had tried to steal. Her name, once whispered with reverence in high society, was now pronounced with disdain, a reminder of the price of cruelty and greed. Eduardo did not dwell on these details. His focus was entirely on the reconstruction and happiness of his family. One afternoon, Eduardo received a call. It was a lead, a name, a distant city. He sat beside his mother on the garden bench, with Corvus perched in the tree above them. "Mother," he said, his voice soft, "we found something. A woman, of approximately the right age, who was adopted around the same time and place. There are no guarantees, but it's a start." Miss Lucia took Eduardo's hand, her eyes welling up with a complex emotion: hope, fear, gratitude. I want to know, my son. Even if it's not them, even if they don't want to meet us, I just want to have the peace of knowing I tried." Eduardo nodded, squeezing his mother's hand. "We'll do this together, Mother. In your time, at your pace." He knew that the outcome of this search didn't matter as much as the journey itself. The true reward was already there, in the renewed connection with his mother, in mutual acceptance, in the unconditional love that had blossomed from the ashes of betrayal. Corvus descended from the tree and landed on Miss Lucia's shoulder, gently pecking her grey hair. It was as if the Raven, the guardian of truth, was blessing that new beginning. Eduardo smiled, his heart light. He had learned that life, with its twists and turns and challenges, was a tapestry woven with threads of pain and joy, of loss and reunion. But the strongest thread, the one that gave meaning to everything, was that of family love. The mansion, once a symbol of status and power, was now a home, a refuge of love and acceptance. Eduardo, Miss Lucia, and Corvus together represented the strength of overcoming, the beauty of forgiveness, and the invaluable richness of human connection. Life went on, not without its scars, but with the promise of a future where love and loyalty would always be the guides, the true treasure to be cultivated. The journey to the distant city was a mix of anxiety and hope. Eduardo and Miss Lucia sat side by side on the plane, his mother's hands in his, a silent bond of support. Corvus, in his carrier, cawed softly, sharing the anticipation. Miss Lucia looked out the window, the landscape passing by, but her mind was on a distant past, a bohemian studio, a forbidden love, a decision that had haunted her for decades. "No matter what happens, my son," she murmured, her voice choked, "just getting here is a gift." Eduardo squeezed his mother's hand, conveying strength and love. "We are together, mother, and that's what truly matters." Upon arrival, they were greeted by a lawyer who mediated the contact. She led them to a small, cozy cafe where Anna, a woman with brown hair and kind eyes, awaited them. The resemblance to Miss Lucia was subtle but undeniable, especially in the shape of her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. Miss Lucia, seeing her, felt her heart clench, faced with a piece of her history, of a love she thought she had lost forever. Anna, nervous but curious, had been informed of the possibility of finding her biological mother, and after reflection had agreed to the meeting. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she said, her voice soft, looking from Ms. Lucia to Eduardo. Ms. Lucia, choked with emotion, merely nodded, her eyes tearful. Eduardo, noticing his mother's difficulty, intervened. "Anna, my mother, Ms. Lucia, has waited for this moment for a long time. She has a story to share, if you are willing to listen." Anna nodded, and Ms. Lucia, taking a deep breath, began to tell her story. She spoke of the love with the artist, of her youth, of the fear and the painful decision. She didn't seek excuses, only expressed the deep regret and the pain she had carried. Anna listened attentively, her eyes scanning her mother's aged face, searching for traits, understanding a part of herself that had always been a mystery. In the end, Miss Lucia extended a trembling hand. "I'm so sorry, my daughter, for everything." Anna hesitated, then took Miss Lucia's hand. There was no anger in her gaze, only deep understanding and perhaps a glimmer of forgiveness. "I always knew there was a story," she said, a melancholic smile, "and now I know it. Thank you for coming, for being honest." She didn't promise an immediate relationship or a complete family reunion, but the connection, the recognition, was already a balm. That day, Miss Lucia found the peace she sought. The wound, which seemed incurable, finally began to heal. Eduardo watched the scene, his heart overflowing with gratitude. True wealth, he reaffirmed, was not power or fortune, but the ability to heal, forgive, and build bridges of love and understanding. Corvus, who had stayed in the car with Miss Helena, cawed upon seeing them return, as if knowing the mission was accomplished. Back at the mansion, Ms. Lucia spent her days in the garden, with Corvus on her shoulder, her serenity palpable. She had found her place, free from the shadows of the past. Eduardo, by her side, felt the unbreakable strength of family bonds. Sophia's story was a bitter reminder of greed, but Ms. Lucia's journey, an inspiring testament to human resilience. Life, with its complexities, had taught Eduardo that unconditional love, loyalty, and true connection were the pillars of a full existence. His legacy would be one of compassion and truth, honoring his mother's memory and his father's love. The mansion now was a home where the echo of forgiveness and the melody of hope resonated, a true family treasure.